I heard somewhere that maybe my job is to shed light and not to master. And so I want to tell a story. Long, long time ago, there was a group of people and they had a message that they were delivering, and there were people who heard the message. And the people who heard the message were intrigued with the message. They loved the message. And as they heard this message, they wanted to hear more about that message. And after the messengers had left, these people who had heard the message, they'd go home and they'd tell their friends, "You wouldn't believe what I heard. This was just amazing. You should come and hear this." And so they'd invite their friends, and more of them would come along, and they heard the message, and they said, that is different. I mean, I've heard things like it before. It isn't the first time I've heard a message, but there was something about this one that resonated, that struck. And these events where the messengers would come and deliver the message, they became huge events. They became worship almost, or maybe they did. Now, there were people who were critical of this message and the messengers. In fact, they looked at them and they scoffed and they said, they're just partying. They're just here for a party. I don't know what it is that's wrong with them. Now, the messengers didn't deny that they may have enjoyed the party, but they may have said, not now. This isn't the point. The point is this message that we're trying to give. And the message grew, and these events where the message was delivered grew, and it grew to thousands of people coming to hear this message. And this message was about love. It was about compassion. It was about acceptance. It was about looking at the world differently. A different lens. A different way of being. And these events became just incredible. People were starved to come together, to be in this community. They couldn't get enough. And they would travel to be a part of that community. They would follow the messengers. The messengers started noticing they'd see the same people in every place. These people are traveling around with us, watching all of this. Now, I'm not going to say the message over time didn't get distorted, but the message still exists today. In fact, we're heirs of that message in a lot of different ways. A message of love and compassion and kindness. But was it always that way? No. And it was nothing to do with the messengers. It was with the listeners. You see, sometimes people took the message and then they forgot what it really said, and it kind of got twisted, and there were times that it got ugly and it got bad. And it wasn't always pure, and sometimes people got, they became disenchanted with the whole scene because it wasn't what it used to be. But fortunately, the message doesn't depend on those listening or those giving the message. The message is pure and holy and true no matter who's delivering it or who's listening to it. The one basic truth is that we're called, as Jesus said in this passage today, to love God with all of our heart, mind, and soul, and to love our neighbors as ourselves, and it's a full stop. So what I just told you, what I just described to you, depending on your point of view, was either the history of the early church in the book of Acts. Remember, people said to him, "Those people are all just drunk." And their response was, "No, we're not drunk. It's only 9 a.m. So it wasn't out of the realm of possibilities. I think I also just described to you the early life of the Grateful Dead as it spread across this country. Because I see the parallels in both. I see that this message was pure and it just kind of grew. And it wasn't like it was being promoted on radio or any place else. This was a word of mouth following, and the word that was being shared attracted people. So in my life, it's very easy because I have been a huge fan of the band known as the Grateful Dead, and I am a Christian. I am an ordained minister with a seminary degree from an accredited seminary who's dedicated my life to sharing the love of God, to sharing the story of Jesus with people. Those are probably the two things that define me the most of who I've been, and for me to deny one and the other, it's kind of wrong. I want to talk about Jesus' life for a little minute because there's something that fascinates me. I have maybe shared before that our musical taste and a lot of our formation happens when we're about 10, 11, 12 years old, and probably up to 25 or 30, I think if you think about the songs that you were listening at that age, that was your soundtrack. That's when your movie is made. They're going to pick those songs, you know. I mean, we'd all like to maybe think who, you know, I know for me it's Leonardo DiCaprio is going to play me in my movie. But I'm thinking about, you know, what is the soundtrack? What are the songs? And you all have that, I'm hoping. I pray that you have songs in your life that were important to you. Because there's comfort in there. And you know, from 12 to 30 years old, I was so lucky. And I got to tell you, I would flunk preaching class today for talking so much about myself. We weren't supposed to do that. But I have nothing else to tell you but my story and how this relates. And from 12 to 30 years old, there was nothing more important to me than Indiana University basketball, who were the cutest girls in middle school, and what band was coming to Market Square Arena that we could come see. We saw them all. And for younger people here, I hate to tell you this, is you could see every concert that came to town on a part-time fast food job. It would pay for the tickets. I think I paid $6 for the first time I saw that band I love. And that was no different for seeing any of those famous bands that came along. I was telling someone else, I think I paid $20 to see Bruce Springsteen. So you could go to all of this, and it formed. It was so important to us. You know, I'm not going to play the I'm the old man thing, but we only had 3 channels of television, 1 local, 3 networks, and we had the radio. And if you wanted new music, you had to go to the record store. Oh, what a joy that was. Does anybody remember going to the record store? Wasn't that just a magical time and the things? And, you know, I'd love to sit here and show images of album covers and everybody go, ooh, yeah, because you remember those things. Don't you? I know I did. And I got to tell you, I'm so thankful for my friends and my brother and classmates for helping raise me. Because these are the things that help form me, who I am today. I stand before you confessing I'm a deadhead. I am a deadhead. And I'm not ashamed of it. I'm not ashamed of it anymore. Jesus says in this interesting dialogue between the leaders of the church, and they say they want to trap him. That's not very nice, is it? Have you ever wanted to trap anybody and it was a good thing? No. And they want to trap him with a question. They try to say, you know, how much your knowledge is. And Jesus tells them straightforward, you love God, you love your neighbor, you love yourself. And that's it. Pretty straightforward, isn't it? How many of us can go home with that message today and say, I understand that? Am I the only one? You can raise your hand, don't be afraid. Does that make sense? Does it seem like a good idea? Love God, love your neighbor, love yourself. Shouldn't be that complicated, is it? Anybody, any questions? Well, they did. They questioned him. After that straightforward declaration that you love everybody, that you love your neighbor, do you know what they said? Well, who's my neighbor? Do you hear what that question does? Isn't there somebody I don't have to love? Can I hate somebody? No, everybody. And he tells a parable. Jesus tells a parable. He tells a story. And maybe, you know, I got to tell you, that's what I love. I love stories. And he tells the story of the beaten down traveler. We're supposed to love everybody. And as a church, we're supposed to welcome everybody. I was a deadhead long before I was a Christian, as far as coming forward and making a confession of faith. I think I've always been a follower of Jesus my entire life. Even though my parents stopped going to church when I was 10, I always knew every Sunday I was supposed to be here. I wanted to be at church. There was something about it. Maybe younger. Hey, for anybody who thinks not going to church is a great thing, you get live music every week. I love music. It's a beautiful part about being part of a church community is you get people like Teresa and Kim who will play for you. You get guys like Steve who are anxious to come and join you in. We had people come play the harps during Christmas. Music is awesome at church, and it should be this welcoming force. But that wasn't my experience. I will tell you this, and this is the painful part of what I'm telling you. Nobody at a Grateful Dead show ever criticized me because I was a man of faith. They thought it was pretty awesome. Nobody has ever said to me when I was at one of these shows, well, how can you be a Christian? How can you believe all of that stuff? Nobody ever asked me. But I will tell you that when I was a teenager, I was told I was going to hell by a good church person for the music I listened to. I was told I was going to spend the rest of my life in eternal torment in some weird fantasy of theirs about me burning forever because I enjoyed listening to Working Man's Dead, or I enjoyed the Rolling Stones, or I listened to the Beatles, or I listened to this, or I watched some television show. They put warning labels on my records that said it was going to ruin me. Did it work? For all logical things about this band called the Grateful Dead and how it lives today, it should have stopped in 1995. It should have ended. See, that's when Jerry Garcia, who was the most popular figure in the band, the lead guitarist and lead singer, he died in rehab from natural causes, but he was recovering from heroin. He was 53 years old. I wept so much that day, I can't even tell you. I just was back there for a minute reliving it. But it should have stopped then, but it didn't. I got to tell you, it stopped for me then because I didn't want anything to do with it after that because it had gotten bad. It had gotten kind of ugly. There'd been too many shenanigans going on at these shows, and I wasn't as attracted to it anymore. It wasn't what I had gone to the first time. People very aggressive. There were people breaking down fences to get into shows. There were fights with police. That was never the way. That wasn't what the original message was. Like somehow the church has changed and forgotten that original message. By the time 30 years had rolled around, it had gotten kind of bad, and they needed the break that they ended up getting. There were two things, though, that happened to me this summer that were the inspiration for this sermon series. I went to Louisville, Kentucky for a convention of the Christian Church Disciples of Christ, and one of the great things about getting to do that is I got to do something I don't often get to do. I got to go to church. Ministers don't get to go to a worship service very often. We're often standing here. And the worship services were put on so professionally and so beautiful. They were awesome. On the third night, they had what was called Beyonce Mass person leading. And Beyonce Mass is one of the worst marketing names I've ever heard in my life because the first thing it says on their website about the singer Beyonce and Beyonce Mass is, no, we don't worship Beyonce. If that's the first thing you have to put, you need to rethink your title. But what it was is during this worship service, I heard Michael Jackson singing, I heard the band playing Michael Jackson's Man in the Mirror. I heard songs from Beyonce. I heard Bridge Over Troubled Water by Simon and Garfunkel, and this was worship. We were praying, we were having communion, that we're taking up an offering, we were hearing the word of God preached to us, and the music we heard was music that the audience said, yes, I like hearing this in church. And I thought to myself, wow, what kind of music can you play in church? Could I get away with it? No. No, I couldn't get away with playing the Grateful Dead here. Plus, I've seen some incarnations, but the other thing I did is I got invited by my friend, who I was his mentor and following the band. He said, Andy, you got to come back to Indianapolis this summer and see Dead and Company. For those of you who don't know, after 1995, the church, what you could call the Grateful Dead, did a lot of splits. There were a lot of different incarnations further. The other ones, they renamed themselves, rebranded themselves. The music kept playing. And it wasn't quite the same, or I thought so, but in all of those incarnations, all of those different manifestations of this music, I've been to over 100 shows. And I went to another one and saw Dead and Company, and I realized Boy, I'm an old man here now. There are a lot of younger people here, and I see that they're feeling the same thing I used to feel. All of that stuff from the mid-late 90s was gone. There was no aggression. There was no violence. There wasn't everybody in a stupor. It was people coming together in love and fun and having the music. And I have found since then that community is stronger now than it ever was while the actual band was around. It's very strange that it's grown. There are people who will come to a church not knowing anything about it except that the minister's going to talk about the Grateful Dead, and they're going to show up. It's amazing. What I realized seeing that show and hearing that worship service was that for the longest time, I have never been true about who I was. Because for the longest time, I would have been ashamed to come up in front of you and say I was a deadhead because the people at church would tell me I was going to hell. I don't believe that anymore. They just didn't know. They were afraid. You know, life gets scary sometimes, and there are things that we don't understand and we don't know. I was told by somebody, the things out there for your church members, those are called a steal your face symbol. Out there, the skulls with the red, white, and blue and the lightning bolts. And I looked at them and I thought, I wonder if people are going to be a little scared of that. It's a little frightening looking, isn't it? It's not to me. I understand it. I understand the meaning. I know the song from which it came from. I know the album cover. I don't have a tattoo of it yet, but it's coming. I already have a chalice, and I'm going to turn it into that. But I thought about symbols and fright and how they can actually turn out to be something of love. Did you know it was 300 years after the death and resurrection of Jesus that anybody dared to use a cross as a symbol? Because it was frightening. That thing's frightening. If you read the story, I can't think of a worse thing you can do to another human being to take their life away than to do that. And it was very public. And there was a reason that Jesus was the exception. They usually left people up there for us to see, to let us know who was in charge. To heck with that. That's a symbol of love now, isn't it? Isn't it kind of amazing? I suppose if it was done during the French Revolution, maybe wear little guillotines around our necks or something. I don't know. But we have taken something that was horrible and torturous and evil, and we've turned it into a symbol of love. Understand when somebody has a symbol or wearing something, it is always frightening because you're not understanding it. Those crosses used to be real frightening to people, and rightfully so. But we've claimed the cross. We've taken away the fear because Jesus lived again. And it wasn't the final word. What I want to tell you going forth today was don't deny who you are. Don't be ashamed of what brought you here. You have been formed by the experiences, the people you have known, the songs you've heard, the television shows, the books you've read, maybe even a sermon you've heard. You've come here today formed and made unique, and I love each and every one of you. My wish for the church is that it would be more welcoming, that it would welcome everybody, regardless of what they dress like or what they look like or who they love. No judgment. And if you get confused, just listen to the music play. And for the deadheads, know that there's something there. That as a minister, I have been able to connect it all along. For those of you wanting a long theological dissertation about the lyrics of Grateful Dead songs and the faith, well, they're coming, but not today. Today was why. The next 3 weeks will be more of what. I'm a deadhead, I'm a minister, and I'm no longer going to be ashamed to do it. It's my jam, it's my groove. But it doesn't mean I don't love other music, and it doesn't mean that you have to love my music. I guess I told somebody what would be the goal of this sermon series, and if I got one Grateful Dead fan to come forward and dedicate their life to following Jesus, it would be great. But if I got one of my church members to go with me to the Sphere in Las Vegas to see Dead & Company this summer, it might even be better. I did this for me. I did this because when I went to seminary, they tried to do what they always do. They tried to take who you were and they tried to make you into something else. And they tried to change me. This is the music you're supposed to listen to. This is how you're supposed to pray. This is how you're supposed to believe. And a lot of times when that happens, I got good training, but they take away who you are. And I got to be Andy. I can't play at being anybody else. And I have to confess to the things I am, the life I've lived. And I have to be able to back it up. One of the things they do when you are ordained as a minister is they put a robe and a stole on you. I haven't worn, it's been a while since anybody's seen me in one of these here. This is the stole I got on the day I was ordained. I love it. It's got just all these beautiful different crosses, that symbol. But this summer, when I was at the assembly in Louisville, there was a woman there who was making stoles. And so I talked to her about the fact that I don't wear them anymore, but someday I'm going to be buried, and maybe I should be in one there. And so we sat and talked about, I'd like to be buried in a Grateful Dead stole. I had no idea about this sermon series when I ordered this. Honestly, no clue. In fact, I told her she was in no rush, and then I got the sermon series. I said, now you got to rush. I got to have this by 1st of January, and she did the work. And there are a lot of symbols, and this is my stole that kind of told the story of who I am as a deadhead. Wow. Lots of symbols, and anybody wants to know any about them. Shows where I first got on the bus in 1977, and my last show in 23 goes across the country. 2 things that were made just for me were this banner at my ordination that told my story of how I ended up catching fire and going into ministry. And this tells of my love for the Grateful Dead and how I connect it with my faith and the voices of angels. Even an old Victrola. Evelyn, you still got one of those in the house? You can afford it. I know this may seem irreverent to some people, but if God was able in ordinary things to find holiness, in fact, in evil things to find holiness, at the table, we shared a meal. God makes it holy. We sang a song in here. We sing songs, but somehow we know that one was holy. We come here today for an event, and you are standing on holy ground. What I am encouraging you to do is to continue to seek out your faith. Don't let it stop. And don't deny the road that brought you here. It shaped you. It formed you. Embrace who you are, because I have a promise for you. You're one of the neighbors that he talks about in that story. You're to be loved. You're to be cherished. You are to be lifted up in the sight of God because you are a child of God. Embrace who you are fully. Embrace who you are and what brought you here. And keep seeking better ways to love God and to love your neighbor. I thank you all for being here.